In a dystopian society where the authoritarian government burns books and suppresses free thought, one fireman begins to question the powers that be. Following the Second Civil War, the United States was subjected to an absolute dictatorship under the ministry. As part of their tyrannical rule, firemen were appointed to burn every single book, effectively censoring all knowledge the ministry deemed dangerous. As a result, the population, or natives, was left with little access to literature, with the ministry providing a severely limited selection of reading materials through their replacement for books called The Nine, a heavily controlled version of the internet. In his house, a fireman named Montag lights a matchstick, carefully examining its flame. After blowing the fire out, he remembers himself as a child walking toward his father's room. Afterward, Montag applies his eye drops while listening to the latest news about rebel arrests. Montag then commands Yuxi, his AI assistant, to open his photo gallery so he can pick his preferred image to upload onto the Nine. Following this, Montag goes to the fire station where he spars with his mentor and senior officer, Captain Beatty, who easily subdues him. In a training class, Beatty conducts a lecture, informing the children about a group called the Eels, who rebelliously read books and consume illegal knowledge. The captain warns the trainees that these rebels want to poison their hearts and minds. Beatty also reveals the group's plan of uploading the books onto the Dark Nine, their version of the dark web, to preserve literature and allow people to access all the books ever written. As he continues his talk, Beatty dismisses the Eels' claim that the ministry limits its citizens' access to information. To prove this, he orders Yuxi to show the available readings on the Nine, which are the Bible, the Lighthouse, and Moby Dick. These are the only books they can read because anything else will corrupt their minds. Before he ends his lecture, Beatty emphasizes that their job as firemen is to protect everyone from unhappiness. In unison, the students recite, "Happiness is truth, freedom is choice, self is strength." Then, Montag takes the floor and demonstrates the book-burning procedure, and the whole class applauds him. Shortly after, the firemen are alerted that the Eels are on the move, prompting them to rush to the location. On their way, they sing their song of bravery in chorus. When an Eel hacker group sees the firemen outside, they quickly rush to upload everything they can to the Dark Nine. Shortly after, the firemen infiltrate the hideout, arresting the rebels. After getting into a fight with an Eel, Montag heads to another room, only to discover busy servers and a computer in the process of uploading all the books onto the web. Seeing this, he smashes it for the whole world to see. Before setting the other devices ablaze, Montag punishes the Eel by deleting his identity, restricting him for 25 years. While observing the flames, Montag recalls his memory again, seeing himself slowly approaching his father. Later, Montag accompanies Beatty to a club to see Clarisse, an Eel informant who's been on restriction for 6 years. Before the captain talks to the woman, he orders Montag to stay on guard. In exchange for revealing other Eels' locations, Clarisse requests Beatty to take a year off her restriction, but he only agrees to 6 months. As Clarisse prepares to leave, Montag intercepts, pointing out that Beatty hasn't instructed her to go, but the Eel mocks him for being the captain's pet, which offends the fireman. Before taking off, she encourages him to question his actions and read books before burning them. Following Clarisse's tip, Beatty and Montag find themselves in a clothing boutique, where they find an old man being filmed. When Montag plays the recording, he watches the old man recalling pre-Civil War times when people were free to read. Suddenly, Beatty turns off the video and argues with the old man, implying people were unhappy in the past because of the differing opinions. However, the war survivor asserts that he came from a time when firemen put fires out instead of starting them. When Beatty explains that Benjamin Franklin gave them the right to burn, the old man corrects him, but the captain only continues to threaten his kind. The curious Montag listens to their conversation intently. After arresting the Eels, Beatty and Montag head to a local bar to talk about the former's upcoming promotion as major and the latter's as captain. Excited about the changes in his career, Montag wishes his dad was there to celebrate his success. Beatty agrees and assures Montag that he'll be just as great as his dad, who was a heroic fireman in his day. Meanwhile, Clarisse meets up with another Eel and hands him a recorder containing information in exchange for money and shelter. When Montag arrives home, he remembers what the old man said earlier about the time when firemen used to put out fires and Benjamin Franklin as the first fire department founder. However, when he asks Yuxi about it, the AI is programmed to tell him that it's a classic eel lie. When the AI's answer dampens Montag's mood, Yuxi immediately notices. To help improve his vitals, the AI promises to reconfigure his cocktail and have new eye drops delivered. Meanwhile, Beatty instructs his Yuxi to go dark, ensuring his privacy. The captain then covers the AI's cameras and opens a safe, which holds a pen. He then uses the pen to write, "To live is to suffer, but to survive is to find meaning in one's suffering," on a small piece of paper. The following morning, Beatty organizes the pieces of paper with written quotes on them and burns them all, implying that despite his interest in prose, he has to remain loyal to his sworn duty. Meanwhile, Montag touches his late father's helmet and recalls his face. After commanding Yuxi to go dark, he takes the camcorder's tape out of his pocket, revealing that he stole it from the old man they arrested. Then, he opens a vent in the bathroom, where he keeps forbidden items from past raids, including a VHS tape, a postcard, and a film tape. That night, the firemen go on a mission to another eel hideout Clarisse disclosed. There, they find an old woman reading a book, who's completely unbothered by their presence. To get the woman's attention, Beatty snags and throws away the book she's reading. However, when the woman is interrogated, she only responds using book quotes. Just then, a fireman calls them upstairs, where they shockingly discover a room filled with books. Beatty takes a book by Franz Kafka from the shelf and reveals that he's read it as a part of his job. He then hands it to Montag and asks him to read it. After reading the first line, the fireman shuts it midway and hands it back to the captain, who tells him that the book contains themes of insanity. As they continue to explore the library, Beatty reveals that he recognizes some of the books, and that they need to be burned to keep people happy. Before burning everything, the captain tells Montag to take one last look, as he might never see a similar sight ever again. Shortly after the captain leaves, Montag secretly takes a book and hides it under his shirt. As the firemen throw the books downstairs for immolation, Montag remembers a similar event from childhood. When they're about to burn the books, the old woman refuses to go with them. Instead, she opens her robe, showing several books taped to her torso, and then drops a lit matchstick, setting herself and all of her books on fire. As they watch her burn, she mentions omnis, leaving the firemen confused. The rest of the world also watches the lady burn through live television. Clarisse, who watches amongst the crowd, gets emotional over her fellow eel's demise. After the event, Beatty receives a call from his senior officer, Commissioner Nyari, informing him that the ministry has wiped out the word omnis from the 9 because it's gone viral. Following this, Nyari scolds the captain for being careless with the woman, advising him to anticipate such actions in the future. The following day, Montag notices that the ministry edited the footage and had the old woman say coward instead of omnis. After confronting Beatty about it, the captain shares that the ministry won't reveal what omnis means, and it's up to them to figure it out. Later, Beatty asks Montag to burn his palm using a lighter as a demonstration of how he keeps his composure under pressure. As this happens, the captain praises the fireman that he isn't like the others. When he arrives home, Montag heads to the bathroom and orders Yuxi to go dark. In the bathroom, he starts reading the book he stole from the old woman's house. When he reads 2 × 2 = 5 out loud, Yuxi suddenly reacts and corrects him, asserting that it's mathematically false. When the concerned AI asks if he's okay, the surprised Montag hides the book and leaves the room. In his apartment, Beatty starts scribbling Montag's name on the paper, but scratches it out immediately. Then, he writes another quote from a book he recalls. Meanwhile, Clarisse meets a fellow eel named Gustavo, who thinks that the old woman's self-immolation was staged. He then reminds her of the secret mission they're pursuing, and asks for help with connections. Still bothered by the old woman's demise, Montag takes the train to another part of the city to find Clarisse, who immediately threatens him when she catches him following her. Since Clarisse gave them the old woman's address, the curious Montag asks her who the old woman was, and what omnis means. When the eel denies knowing her, the fireman shows the book he stole, assuring her of his sincere intentions. Later, Clarisse takes Montag to her apartment, where he asks her to read the book aloud. Clarisse explains that the ministry limited the people's languages in order to limit thought. In fact, they created a universal language for social control. However, the eel asserts that the system isn't entirely actually the ministry's fault, as it was created by people who demanded happiness. She also reveals that the eye drops he uses cause him to forget his memories. Later, Clarisse shares that she's an eel by nature. When she was younger, she read books and watched films with her eel parents. However, one day, she had a change of heart and tried living a normal life, thinking it would make her happy. Reflecting upon Clarisse's words, Montag starts to question his job as a fireman, thinking about the effort of the authors who wrote the books firemen like him have burned through the years. Before the fireman heads home, Clarisse teaches him how to play the harmonica. Later that night, Montag decides not to take the eye drops. As he looks at himself in the mirror, he recalls a childhood memory of his dad handing him a book. The following day, Beatty gathers his firemen to inform them about the eel's operation, explaining that the rebels have discovered a way to encode language into DNA. The Omnis is a specific DNA sequence that contains a vast collection of knowledge and ideas that the rebels wish to preserve. Beatty adds that the eels are planning to transport the DNA to Canada. For their mission, they must find it before it crosses the border, because if they don't, knowledge will spread like a virus and infect everyone's minds. In search for the DNA, the firemen conduct raids all over the city, arresting every eel they can find. However, when Montag encounters a blind person reading in Braille, he wonders even more why access to literature is so important. Eventually, Beatty finds Clarisse and the other eels and asks them to line up. To force Clarisse to reveal where the Omnis is, the captain blackmails her, threatening to reveal her betrayal to her comrades. When she doesn't say anything, an enraged Beatty starts hitting the male eels with his rifle. Nearby, Montag suddenly turns off the light switch, distracting the captain. As a commotion ensues, the fireman helps Clarisse escape, who later decides to hide at a compound where the other eels are. As the raids continue, Montag finds a father and daughter hiding in a bathtub. Out of mercy, he ignores them and closes the curtains. However, a disappointed Beatty witnesses this and returns to the bathroom to arrest the eels the kind fireman spared. As Montag looks at the eels, he suddenly remembers the day he watched the fireman arrest his father after finding out that he owned books. Later, Beatty confronts Montag for pretending not to see the eels. When the fireman reveals that he felt bad for the child, the captain reasons that the eels used their children as decoys. Fed up with his conflicted feelings regarding his occupation, Montag resigns from his position as a fireman and surrenders his jacket on the captain's table. In response, the furious Beatty throws the jacket back at the fireman, claiming he didn't invest 16 years building him up just for him to throw his opportunity away. To get Montag back on his side, he blackmails the man, saying he'll report the earlier incident to the authorities. Following this, Beatty advises Montag to go home and rest so he can go to work tomorrow. Later, Clarisse arrives in a vehicle with a group of eels, instructing Montag to join them. Nearby, another fireman named Douglas witnesses this and later reports it to Beatty, who's enraged after reviewing the footage. In the vehicle, Montag finds himself seated next to Gustavo, who suddenly flares at him for deleting his brother's identity for the whole world to see. Before things escalate further, Clarisse interrupts them, informing the fireman that the people in the compound are interested to see him. She then instructs him to cover his eyes with a black cloth. When Montag arrives at the eel's hideout, he meets Tony, who wonders why he stole a book from the old woman's library. As they interrogate him about his profession, the fireman confesses that he burns books because that's all he's known his entire life. Montag adds that looking at the book made him recall his childhood when he was sitting by the ocean, observing how the sand fell through his fingers. He likens this experience to letting his life pass him by when he chose to burn books, implying that he wants to escape the system. Then, Tony reveals that they've resorted to memorizing the books to preserve their contents in their minds, pointing out that it's a way they can be untraceable to the authorities. She then introduces the other members who've each been tasked to memorize a book. Since Clarisse recommended Montag to them, Tony has a task for him regarding the Omnis, but before he's integrated into the group, she wants to make sure if he can be trusted, so she wants to test the fireman's loyalty, asking him to end the life of a fellow fireman they've tied up in the back room. After receiving the blade from Mao, a nervous Montag practices by stabbing a sack. Upon entering the back room, Montag sees the fireman's head covered in a black cloth, with his hands tied to a chair. When he's about to end him, an eel interrupts, pointing out that he passed the test. Then, the man in the chair removes the cloth over his head, revealing him to be a member of the eels pretending to be a prisoner. After he earns his spot on the team, Tony introduces Montag to Clifford, who's memorized 13,000 books. The genius owns a bird named Lenny, who holds the Omni's DNA, which his geneticist mother injected into the creature. Tony explains that Montag's mission is to take Clifford and his pet bird to the Canadian marine scientists safely. For the first step of the mission, Tony explains that Montag needs a transponder to get the scientist's signal. Once the scientists have the bird, they'll duplicate its DNA and inject it into other animals to spread knowledge. That night, Montag returns to the fire station and steals a transponder. However, on his way out, a suspicious Beatty confronts him and orders Douglas to hand him a book that he found. When Montag's about to burn it, Beatty stops him and instructs him to read it aloud, setting the pages on fire while he does so. The fireman plays along and then declares his loyalty, making the captain proud of him once again. Later, while Montag thinks they're going on a raid, Beatty takes him to his house, where he shockingly finds a pile of books in his living room. As people all over the Nine watch, the fireman denies owning the books, insisting that he was framed. Left with no choice, Montag burns the pile, and while doing so, suddenly remembers Beatty arresting his father in the past. In his quiet rage, the fireman sets everything aflame. Outside the house, Beatty deletes Montag's identity and then orders Douglas to find Clarisse and the other eels, prompting the ex-fireman to end his life with a flamethrower. To escape, Montag creates a diversion and then flees the scene. After meeting Clarisse, they drive to the hideout, unaware that they're being followed. Beatty arrives at the destination before Montag and starts burning everything. To save his friends, the ex-fireman rushes to the barn, only to find Mao and Clifford's lifeless bodies. When Montag sees that Lenny is still alive, he promptly attaches the transponder to the bird. However, Beatty appears behind him, commanding him to stop. With his loyalty to the eels, the ex-fireman releases the bird and lets it escape through the hole in the roof. Subsequently, Montag closes his eyes and accepts his fate, as an enraged Beatty burns him with a flamethrower. Following the events, it's revealed that Montag successfully accomplished his mission, as Lenny joins a flock of birds heading to Canada, where scientists await to rebuild a knowledgeable society.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.